Hi, my name is Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss Boris Johnson's failure to carry out very basic Remembrance Sunday duties as Prime Minister with any consideration whatsoever. I suppose that should come as no surprise. What was surprising even for me, and even though, yes, the BBC have covered for this guy many times before, is the extent to which our supposedly independent anti-Beeb went in order to hide it from public view. But first, if you'd like to receive notifications of upcoming content, then please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification. So yesterday, the Sunday just before Armistice Day, Remembrance Sunday, our political leaders represent the nation by participating in what is supposed to be a dignified ceremony to remember our war dead. An act of humility where politicians abandon their egos for a few hours to recognise whether you agree with war or not and whether you agree with individual wars or not, that people have nonetheless given their lives for their country and the people of that country. But this was just too much for Boris Johnson. To simply stand in dignified silence for a bit and then lay a wreath at the Cenotaph, a wreath that someone else has prepared and given to him, all he had to do was walk forward somberly, place it down carefully and look like he gave a crap for people who died for the freedoms he now enjoys. Freedoms that he seems to be trying to take away from others. So what happened exactly? Well, as you can imagine, and with the nation's media on the ceremony at the Cenotaph, a ceremony that was replicated around the country in much smaller versions by other war memorials, the event is carefully choreographed in order to reflect the nation's mood. The procedures are clearly and carefully explained to everyone who's going to be taking part, and political leaders have, in the past, managed to follow these simple procedures. I mean, crikey. I had more demanding roles to carry out when I was a Boy Scout taking part in Remembrance Sunday events. Now, it began pretty badly when the 2-minute silence began, so I'm not going to say what pose someone should adopt during this time. It is conventional, you might think, to look down thoughtfully, but I see nothing wrong with looking straight ahead either. The point is that you stand still in silent contemplation. Nobody knows whether you're really thinking about the people who have died in battles ordered by past and present political leaders such as himself, but at least you might be. It's not hard, stand still and shut up. But apparently, this was too hard for Johnson. Coat flapping in the wind because he's too fat to button it up. All he could do during the silence was look around him. Bored with the whole affair, he was presumably looking in vain for a burger van to give him something to do while everyone else was playing musical statues. I mean, this is the sort of thing you do see like a 3 or 4-year-old. They might do that at their first such ceremony. Not fully seized of the significance, we understand, but this is the Prime Minister. A man older than me. You know, he understood what this was about. He understood the significance. He just didn't care. Then he began his walk towards the Cenotaph. Before time, before he was supposed to. He couldn't even get that right. Again, no doubt bored with the whole show. He just wanted to get it over and done with. Couldn't even be asked to manage walking in a straight line the way he'd been told to. And then for his hat trick of carelessness, he couldn't even lay the wreath correctly. As I said before, it's not like he had to make it himself. Someone else took care of that and handed it to him. He didn't even have to pick it up from the shop. All he had to do was walk forward at the right time and pace and place it down with a bit of thought. And then when the time came, or rather before the time came because he was in such a rush, he just shoved it onto the ground upside down. I don't think this has ever happened before. Everyone else manages to place theirs the right way up, as people have done year after year after year. All too much for Boris Johnson there. Now, I'll grant you this is his first time laying a wreath at the Cenotaph as Prime Minister. It's not his first time. But still, is there anyone listening to me right now who really believes that if they were putting themselves in his shoes, that they think that they would have trouble carrying out this simple task that was required of him? As I said, I carried out roles like this myself as a scout, and before doing that, I had to march for miles to the ceremony with a bloody great flag. He was chauffeured to and from the event, handed the wreath, and told to stand still, shut up, walk forward at the right time, place the wreath down, sorted. And the thing that makes me shake my head about all this is, on Sunday morning, I was at a more local ceremony in North Lincolnshire, nowhere near London, and I was thinking to myself, just randomly, I wonder how Boris is going to cock this up at the Cenotaph. Half joking, really. Although the thought occurred to me, I didn't actually, in all seriousness, expect a media storm to await me when I got home. But I wondered how he would mess it up. You know, the thing is, if I can think, oh, I bet Boris Johnson's going to make a mess of this, surely those close to him must have considered it as well. So although everyone is given their instructions, I'm quite certain that not a single person that's in charge of looking after his public image would have thought, oh, he's done it before, he'll be fine. No, they'll have gone through it with him very carefully. They know he doesn't take things seriously. I'm sure they went over it with him more times than would normally be required of a Prime Minister. And I also wonder what those poor sods were thinking as they watched this nightmare all unfold. But that wasn't the end of the disgrace. I mean, that was pretty bad. Think about this. All he had to do was stand still, look thoughtful for 2 minutes, then at the appropriate time walk slowly towards the memorial, place the wreath, consider it, walk back. But no, as I say, that wasn't the end of the disgrace. That Boris Johnson once again humiliated the nation and insulted the very people who have sacrificed so much to give him his life of luxury, that should come as no major surprise. He doesn't give a toss about anyone. But the cover-up of this shame by the BBC was distasteful at best and insulting and embarrassing at worst. And yes, I've spoken about BBC bias before. The news teams are headed up not just by Conservative supporters. It is possible to support a party and be objective when it's part of your job. But they are close friends of senior Tories and don't take their journalistic standards seriously. They have covered up for Conservative lies for a long time by failing to call out those lies during interviews for years now. But they took it to the next level this morning. This was the day after, on Armistice Day itself, as their next day reporting featured older footage of Boris Johnson at the Cenotaph from his time as Foreign Secretary. The BBC later described it as a production error, but this is absolute nonsense. They had footage coming in from their team at the Cenotaph the previous day. To have replaced it with older footage from 3 years ago required someone to quite deliberately go and pull it from the archives. And it was embarrassing as well, as you can imagine. Johnson looked quite different in the two periods of time, but the wreath was definitely different. The wreath that the Prime Minister lays has a very distinct style, which is very different to the one that he laid as Foreign Secretary. You know, not even at first glance could you confuse the two. There is no way of accidentally using footage from a previous year in a report on the previous day's events. It was deliberate and a very obvious attempt to cover for the Prime Minister, and it doesn't bode well for anything like reasonable coverage of the general election campaign. I mean, it's not like the BBC make mistakes like that on a regular basis, or indeed ever in a situation where you could ever believe it's deliberate, not deliberate. You know, of course they don't make these sort of mistakes. If they had a system whereby they could not distinguish between archive footage from 3 years ago and footage that they've only just shot the day before, then this sort of thing would happen all the time. It would be inevitable. No, they're a professional outfit. They know what they're doing. You know, there are such things as human error, and occasionally that has happened at the BBC, but not like this. You cannot get this mistake. I couldn't make this mistake, and I'm nowhere near as professional as they are. But of course, if the BBC insist on not reporting the facts, then the onus is on the rest of us to do so. The Prime Minister does not give a toss about anyone but himself. The notion that he would ever work as Prime Minister to make people's lives better is a complete fallacy. He literally couldn't even stand in silence for 2 minutes, just stand still for 2 minutes in gratitude to millions of members of the British military who have sacrificed their lives and their futures, and potentially some of their families' futures, so that we could have ours, including him. And to place the wreath upside down is impossible if you give any thought to the process and to the servicemen and women. The reason why there is an upside down is because there's a written message on the wreath that anyone with any care would be reading as they place the wreath as a focus. After all, it's supposed to be their message. Only someone who couldn't give a crap could possibly make such a heinous error. And to just make the obvious comparison with his counterpart in the United States, Donald Trump has insulted veterans and war dead in his own land on multiple occasions. but I cannot recall him ever managing to make such a thoughtless mess of a wreath-laying ceremony as president. So I looked it up. I looked just in case I was forgetting. And no, unless someone can correct me, the situation we have here is I don't believe Donald Trump has done that. So what we're talking about is the scenario whereby Boris Johnson is even more thoughtless and uncaring than Donald Trump. That is a hell of an accolade, and we need to remember that when we're talking about Boris Johnson in future. So I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. If you'd like to support the channel further, then please click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.